Well, greetings 1010 fans, and today I want to talk to you about the Paper 1 assignment sheet, first of all, so that you have a really clear idea about what this paper will be like, and then I want to talk briefly about that document entitled Developing a Thesis Statement. So to follow along with me, click on Content up at the top of our Brightspace course page, and then go down to Major Paper Assignments and Related Materials and click on Paper 1 Assignment Sheet, Summary and Response. So if you remember, in my last video, I talked to you about what a summary and response is and how to organize it. So this time around, I'm going to give you the actual paper assignment sheet that details what this first major paper will be like, that gives you all the due dates for everything, the various steps in the process, and then the date that the final draft is due, and all of the important things that you need to know. But that first sheet I reviewed last time around just gave you an overview of what this paper is about, how to write a summary and response, and how to organize it. So for this first major paper, you'll write a summary and response essay about either In Defense of Letter Writing by Eva Durzik, that piece that we're reading, or You Can't Talk to Your Professor Like This by Molly Worthen. So you'll choose between one of those two. And you want to refer back to that what is a summary and response essay and how should I organize it sheet that I just mentioned for helpful suggestions, along with the chapter on this subject in your Norton textbook, which is on page 33, I believe. So here are the important dates as we kind of move through the process of paper 1. So Tuesday the 7th, that's the first important date, will be the idea workshop for paper 1. So this is an assignment that I give you where we're generating some preliminary ideas about this first paper. So to complete this, you will click on the Assignments tab up toward the top of our Brightspace course page, and then you'll look for Idea Worksheet for paper 1 and click there. And you'll follow the instructions there, and you'll submit before 11:59 p.m. on Tuesday, September the 8th. And let's make sure that's right, because I'm seeing the 7th and then I'm seeing the 8th. So, sorry, that should be the 7th, not the 8th, the 7th. So I'll go back in and correct that on the paper 1 assignment sheet. And then Monday the 13th, you'll submit your rough draft. So you'll use what I call the Mla Template for paper 1. And this is a really cool tool that I've created to assist you in properly creating and formatting your draft. And you'll submit this by 11:59 p.m. So that you can receive feedback from me. So again, there are detailed instructions in the weekly checklist there. And remember that 10 points will be deducted from your paper 1 grade if you don't upload that rough draft before 11:59 p.m. on Monday, September the 13th. So very important to do that to avoid that 10-point grade deduction. So the Mla template for paper 1 is it's a template. It's a creation that I've made that you can actually start typing your paper into, and it tells you what to do as you're writing. So it's really a cool tool to use. And then the final draft of paper 1 is due on Monday the 20th of September before 11:59 p.m. So to submit that final draft, you'll click on the Assignments tab, and then you'll click on Paper 1 Final Draft. So remember the policy about major papers. 10 points are deducted from your paper 1 grade for every single calendar day that final draft is late. And that includes the day that it's due and weekends. And I do not accept papers at all after 5 days, because in a college class, you don't go back and submit things late. You have to submit on time. So very important. So the specifics, this paper should be at least 2 full pages in length. If it's less than that, you're not going to make a very good grade. So if you only turn in 1 page, that's half a paper. So you might make a 50. That's an F, right? So it's got to be at least 2 full pages in length, typed, double-spaced in Times New Roman, 12-point font. And that's very important because typing it in Times New Roman 12-point font keeps us all around the same word count for 2 full pages. Standard margins. For this first major paper, you do not have to conduct any outside research, and you do not have to use any secondary sources. But you will, however, be expected to use MLA citation to cite the text you're writing about within your paper after you paraphrase. So after you take the writer's words and put them into your words when you're summarizing the main idea and main points, then you'll need to cite it. And that template will help show you how to do that. You'll also need a separate works cited page, and your essay needs to conform to a formal academic structure. So you've got your introduction, your thesis, your supporting paragraphs, your formal conclusion. The objective is twofold. First, to summarize the thesis, the main idea, the main message, and then the main supporting ideas of your chosen text in your own words. That's paraphrasing. And then secondly, to offer your response, so your critique, your evaluation, your opinion of the author's essay and ideas based on your own views. So to create a successful summary and response essay, here are some questions you want to ask yourself as you're writing, as you're working. Have I clearly stated the title of the essay, article, story I'm writing about and the author's full name in my opening paragraph? And really, it should appear in your very first sentence, right? In a summary and response. Have I referred to the author by last name only after mentioning his or her full name in the opening line? So this may be a new rule for you if you're coming directly from high school that you might not have been introduced to before. But it's protocol in college writing and all academic writing that after you've introduced the author or the person you're talking about by his or her full name at the beginning of your paper, you refer to him or her by last name only from that point forward. So if I were writing about Albert Einstein, I would not call him Albert. I wouldn't call him Al. I wouldn't say my good buddy Al, even though that would have been really cool if he could have been my buddy. I wouldn't call him Mr. Einstein. I'd call him Einstein. And that makes me seem like a professional academic writer. Have I clearly stated the thesis, so that the main idea or claim made by the author whose text I've chosen to write about in my opening paragraph? Have I highlighted the supporting points offered by the writer of the piece I'm summarizing in the body of my essay? Have I offered responses to the author's main ideas and supporting points? So have I critiqued the strengths and weaknesses of the piece? Have I offered an opinion on the ideas that this author has expressed? Have I made sure to avoid using first person I and the words you or your throughout my essay, unless I'm quoting, right? I'm not going to say, I enjoyed this essay and you will too. You will see that this essay was great, right? No, I'm not going to say things like that. I'm going to use the words one or ones instead. One may appreciate the compelling nature of this essay. One may see that the author used effective techniques. Again, this makes me sound like a college level writer. Have I used transition words and phrases so that the reader can more easily follow along with my thoughts? So I'm going to say, one may see that blah, blah, blah. However, first, secondly, next, finally, in addition, moreover, on the other hand, I'm going to use those transition type words. Have I used sentence variety in my essay? And this may also be a new concept for you. So you don't want all of your sentences to feel the same in terms of their length, right? You want to sort of mix it up. So you might have a long sentence followed by a shorter sentence. You don't want them all to be short, choppy little sentences. You don't want them all to be long, convoluted sentences. You want a balance of that in your paper. Have I used language that is appropriate for college level writing? I'm not a high school writer anymore. I'm a college writer now. So my language needs to feel formal rather than informal and conversational. It's not like I'm chatting with a buddy or texting. I have to make my language feel college ready. So I'm not going to use words like stuff, right? I'm going to use more formal college level wording. And it's a process, and it may feel a little strange to you at first, but you'll adapt. Have I organized this paper well? So for example, did I organize it chronologically? Did I discuss each point the author made one by one? Or did I respond with my own opinions after the summary portion of the essay? So I may have used the block method. I may have used the point-by-point method that we mentioned in that previous document that I did a video on. Either way is acceptable. It's just a matter of which way is better for you as a writer. Have I carefully checked my essay for typos, for spelling errors, grammatical errors, mechanical errors? This is college writing, my friends. You've got to look at every single line you write to make sure you're not making boo-boos, right? Do not submit a paper full of spelling errors to your college professor. This is not good. And you have a tool that I didn't have back in the day, back in the dark ages. You have spell check and grammar check. And so you need to carefully, after you have written a draft of your paper, use spell check and grammar check to make sure that you're not misspelling words and making grammatical errors. And obviously we're going to learn more about grammar and mechanics as we're going through the course. Have I asked someone else to read my essay and offer feedback? Have I enacted my professor's suggestion on my rough draft when writing my final draft? So I'm going to give you extensive feedback this first time around when you submit your rough draft. I won't be able to do that every time, but I will be doing it this first time around. So what you need to do is go back and read my suggestions on your rough draft and actually enact them into the final draft. Because for every suggestion I make that you don't enact, that's points that you're losing, and that's your grade going down, see? So that's the point of my extensive feedback. Have I met that minimum 2 full page length requirement to avoid point deductions? So now I give you some examples of possible intro thesis game plans for paper 1. And this first one is In Defense of Letter Writing by Eva Durzik. In Eva Durzik's In Defense of Letter Writing, the author underscores the value of the important skills gained from engaging in the process of sitting down to write a letter. So see how in that very first sentence, because this is a summary response, it's short, it's sweet, it's to the point. So in that very first sentence, I have the author's full name. I have the title of the piece correctly punctuated in quotation marks, right? And I've given the reader the author's thesis, the author's main idea, which is the value of the important skills that we gain from engaging in the process of writing a letter. Though opponents would argue that modern society benefits greatly from the ease and convenience of quick communication via social media and devices, Durzik effectively explains the advantages of the lost art of letter writing. So there's my intro, and there's my thesis. So in this case, if I'm writing a paper of this sort, I am arguing that Durzik does this well. She's effective. She does a good job. And I'm agreeing with her, right? But this is my summary part. I'm not getting into my opinions heavily just yet. So game plan. For this kind of intro thesis in a summary and response essay, you first summarize her key points, offering examples from her text. You will next respond to her ideas by either agreeing or disagreeing with them, but no first person I, use one instead, and or by offering examples of her effective writing techniques. So from that little short paragraph that I just gave you, I would move from that into summarizing her main supporting points, right? And then I'd move from that into the response part where I'm going to talk about what I think, but without using I. So now I give you an example from You Can't Talk to Your Professor Like This by Molly Worthen. In You Can't Talk to Your Professor Like This by Molly Worthen, the author explains why using professional etiquette matters in today's world, both in and out of the classroom. Worthen uses quotes and examples from fellow professors, students, and historians to effectively emphasize her point that the principles of traditional etiquette represent important values that have made our universities and our country great. So, in my opening paragraph here, in my very first sentence, again, I have the title. I've correctly punctuated it in quotation marks. I have the author's full name. I have her main idea that using professional etiquette matters in the world, in the classroom and outside of the classroom. And then I've explained that she uses quotes and examples from fellow professors, from students and historians to effectively, or I could use a word like successfully, emphasize her point that the principles of traditional etiquette represent these important values, not just for academia, but for our country in general, right? So the game plan for this kind of intro thesis and a summary and response essay, I'm going to summarize at least 3 of Worthen's main supporting points next. That would be what I would do in my next paragraph. At least 3. I'm going to choose 3 of the points that seem to matter. And then I'm going to go to my response portion. And I'm going to respond by either agreeing or disagreeing with them. Again, no first person I. And by offering examples of her effective writing techniques. So that's the block method. I could also choose to do the point-by-point method in my response. I could offer one of her key supporting points and a response in the same paragraph. The next supporting point and a response in the next paragraph. And so on, and then my conclusion. So that is paper 1, kind of in a nutshell there. And then the next little document that I want to review with you is developing a thesis statement, because we've been talking about thesis statements and how they represent the main ideas or the main claim of a writer. So I want to kind of get into that with you in depth a little more so you're clear. So again, if you click on content and then if you click on course documents in the left-hand sidebar there and then click on developing a thesis statement, you can follow along with me. So a thesis statement in your writing is a statement, or in anyone's writing, a statement that focuses central ideas into 1 or 2 sentences. So everything that you write should develop around a very clear central thesis statement. In fact, if you ask yourself, what's the main point of my paper? Your answer should resemble your essay's thesis statement. That's the point. That's the claim you're making. That's the main idea that you're presenting. So a thesis statement, though, is not just a statement of your opinion, right? It's a statement that makes an argument. So it has to raise a point that is debatable. It answers the question, so what? So what about this idea or this issue? A thesis statement will tell your reader how you will interpret the significance of the subject matter that you're discussing. It provides a roadmap for the rest of your paper. So it's going to tell your reader, here's what you can expect from the rest of my paper. It directly answers the question asked of you in the description of the paper outlined in your assignment sheet, right? So if you go back and reread the paper 1 assignment sheet and you realize, oh, I'm not really writing a summary and response here, then you know you've missed the focus of the paper. So remember, a thesis is an interpretation of a question or a subject. It's not the subject itself. So the subject, for example, or the topic of an essay might be World War II, or it might be the novel Robinson Crusoe, but the thesis statement offers a way to understand something about that war or to understand some aspect of that novel, right? And a thesis makes a claim that other people can disagree with. Now, it may be a highly controversial subject like abortion or gun control. It may be something that's not very controversial, but nevertheless, it's making some kind of claim that someone else could disagree with. It's not ever just a fact. So if I wrote a thesis that said, One may argue that George Washington was the first president of the United States of America. That is not a very good thesis, because I'm not raising a claim that anyone could really disagree with. Everybody knows that. It's just a fact, right? And it's usually a single sentence located at the end of your first paragraph. So it's usually the very last sentence of paragraph 1 that presents your argument or your main idea to your reader. And then the rest of the paper, the body of the essay, gathers and organizes the evidence that persuades the reader of the logic of your interpretation. So remember these facts, though. An effective thesis statement can be longer than just one sentence. It might be 2 sentences. And the thesis might not necessarily appear right at the end of paragraph 1. Some well-written papers at more advanced levels contain what we call an implied thesis, where there's no one sentence that really encapsulates the main idea, but you get the idea nevertheless. For our purposes, though, in 1010, we want a very clear, stated thesis. So how do I get a thesis? How do I arrive at a thesis? A thesis is the result of a lengthy thinking process. So it's not the first thing you're going to do after you read an assignment necessarily. Before you develop an argument on any topic, you have to collect and organize the evidence. You have to look for possible relationships between known facts. So maybe a surprising contrast or a surprising similarity. You think about the significance of those relationships. And once you do this thinking, then you probably will have a working thesis, a basic or main idea or argument that you think you can support with some evidence, but it probably is going to need some adjustment along the way. And writers use a lot of techniques to stimulate their thinking and help them clarify relationships, comprehend the broader significance of a topic, and arrive at a thesis. So you might want to brainstorm ideas with a tutor, with your classmates, with your friends. Obviously, the idea worksheet and the whole peer review process is going to be helpful with that. So how do I know if my thesis is strong? Run it by me, and you'll be doing that when you submit the rough draft. Get help from an online tutor or an in-person tutor. Note that you'll receive feedback from me again when you submit that rough draft. But even if you don't have time to get advice elsewhere, you can always do some evaluating of your own. So when you look at your first draft and your working thesis, ask yourself these questions. Do I actually answer, again, the question asked of me in the assignment sheet? Or am I responding to a statement provided in my assignment sheet that describes the parameters of this essay? So if you reread the question or the prompt, the directions on the assignment sheet after you've constructed your working thesis, this can help you fix an argument that might have missed the focus of that assignment. So note this technique because it's really kind of cool. When you're working with a prompt question, and you'll come upon that frequently in college level writing in all different disciplines, turn that question into an answer by regurgitating it back. That's a fancy word for vomiting it up, in the form of a statement. So, for example, here's a prompt and a question. Write an argument essay on the subject of immigrant refugees. Should the United States welcome them? Why or why not? Now, you're just going to regurgitate the question back in the form of an answer in your thesis. After careful research, one may see that the United States should or should not, depending on your view, welcome immigrant refugees into our country because. So you've just taken the question or the prompt, you've turned it into your answer. Have I taken a position that others might challenge or oppose? So again, if you're just simply stating a fact that no one would or even could disagree with or dispute, then it's possible that you're just providing a summary rather than making an argument. And now all of this information that I'm giving you here is for general guidelines for writing thesis. With a summary and response is a little bit different. And so, is my thesis statement specific enough? Thesis statements that are too vague often don't put forth a very strong argument. So if your thesis contains vague, and that means just words that are not very specific, vague words like thing, good, bad, people, beautiful. See if you could be more specific. What exactly is this thing that you're talking about? Is it an issue? Is it an idea? Is it a problem? Is it an experience? Why and how is something good or bad? So is it unhealthy? Is it advantageous and beneficial? How is it good or bad? And what specifically makes it beautiful? And to which people exactly are you referring? Are you referring to the elderly, to teenagers, to students, to advocates, to opponents? Who are the people, right? So good college writing is about specificity, not using vague words, being as specific as you can be. Does my thesis pass the so what test? So if a reader's first response is, well, so what? Why should this matter to me? Why do I care about this subject? Then you might need to clarify, to forge a relationship, to connect to a larger issue. Does my essay support my thesis specifically and without wandering? So here's the golden rule. Here's the golden rule. Engrave it on your brain in big old gold letters. If your thesis and the body of your essay do not seem to go together, one of them must change. Say that with me. If your thesis and the body of your essay do not seem to go together, one of them must change. All right? And it's okay to change your working thesis to reflect ideas you've figured out in the course of writing your paper. That's part of the writing process. So remember, always reassess, always revise your writing as needed. Writing is a process. And then finally, does my thesis pass the how and why test? So if a reader reads your thesis and the first response is, well, how or why, then your thesis could be too broad, too open-ended, and it might lack guidance for the reader. So see what you might add to give the reader a better take on your position right off the bat. So now here are some more concrete examples to sort of allow this to make a bit more sense. So let's say you're writing a persuasive essay on the topic of the other. So this idea that there's someone, for whatever reason, who feels foreign or other to you. And the instructor provides the following prompt on the assignment sheet. Take a position on whether or not an in-group, out-group mentality is healthy for society. Provide sources to support your argument and refute the opposition. But you're kind of lazy, you're in a big hurry, and so you don't take the time to actually read anything. You don't do any kind of preliminary research. Instead, you just turn on the computer and start typing. Kind of like what they do in East Ridge. And so here's what you come up with. There are many reasons why an in-group, out-group mentality may be bad for society. Well, duh, right? That's a very weak thesis. It doesn't tell the reader anything except the fact that there are reasons why this way of thinking may be bad for humans, right? The reader already knows this. It's a fact. There may be reasons why it may be good for humans too. Also, bad is a vague word. Good is a vague word. You can and should expand on new information in the body of your paper, but it's important that your reader receives a clear, solid professional thesis up front. A reader of this weak thesis is going to think, well, so what? What reasons? Why should I agree? Why do I want to keep reading this? So ask yourself the same questions and start to do the hard work of actually comparing the ideas of experts concerning whether or not this idea of designating persons into groups is healthy or not. And as you start to read the research, you'll probably start to consider the facts, like the science that proves that the human brain actually needs to categorize things, people, places, ideas, events, in order to make logical sense of them. And recent research studies provide information on the way in which in-group, out-group mentality maybe benefited evolution even. And the overall morality of the situation. You're going to look at that viewpoint as well. Is it morally right to view oneself as superior to someone else simply because that other person is part of a different group? Like when does it become too far, a bridge too far? So now that you've begun to do the hard work, you have to decide what you think by pushing your comparisons toward an interpretation. So Why does this subject matter in the world? What are its implications for human beings and for society? How does this topic affect us as citizens, as individuals? So remember, a thesis can't just state a fact that everybody knows is true. It has to make a claim that others can disagree with. So you look again at the evidence and you decide you're going to argue that perhaps the in-group, out-group way of viewing the world is not healthy. So you revise your weak thesis. Though some feel that an us and them mentality is pre-programmed into the human brain, research into the topic reveals that this way of viewing the world leads to chaos, war, and unrest for our world. Now you have a working thesis, and included in it is a clear statement of your stance on the issue, some idea of how and why the two sides are disagreeing. So as you write and explore the topic further, you'll begin to categorize the differences more precisely. And then your working thesis might start to feel vague. So maybe you'll now decide that you need to add a second sentence to your thesis to provide a roadmap for some of your main points and to completely clarify your stance. So you end up revising your working thesis into a final thesis that really captures the argument in your paper. Though some feel that an us and them mentality is pre-programmed into the human brain due to evolutionary development processes and is therefore essential to our ability to function, research into the topic reveals that this way of viewing the world leads to chaos, war, and unrest for humankind. To truly evolve as humans in a world whose interactions are becoming more global, we must learn to view others, no matter how different they may seem, as equally deserving of rights, life, and liberty. And that's one way of viewing that particular topic, right? So when you compare this back to the original weak thesis, the final thesis presents a way of interpreting the evidence that illuminates the importance, the meaning of the question in the first place. So keep in mind that this is one of many different ways to look at a topic. It's not necessarily the one and only right answer to the question. So in a college English classroom, and this is really hard for some math majors to grasp because of the way their minds work, and I admire that actually, but there usually is not any one right answer in an English classroom. Rather, there are only strong and weak thesis statements and strong and weak uses of evidence. And there may be 15 different interpretations or 50, right? So let me give you a few tips for organization writing. And again, these are generalized. This document is generalized. It's not specific to a summary response paper, which is a little bit different. But one of the first things you'll ask yourself as you start to think about writing academic papers is, how do I best organize it? Well, traditionally in a generalized college level paper, not a summary and response necessarily, but just in a general paper, you've got your introduction, your introductory paragraph with a hook. And that's a sentence that is designed to hook your reader and reel him or her in, make him or her want to keep reading, right? So it might be a question. It might be a quote that is interesting, that links into the subject you're writing about. It might be a very interesting statement. And so you always should start broadly at the beginning with your hook and then narrow in to your 1 to 2 sentence thesis at the end of the paragraph. And as we get further into this, I'll give you examples of how to start broadly and narrow in. Then there's the body of your paper that presents your main points and provides the evidence to support the thesis. And you might also include what we call the counter argument, if it's an argumentative paper, in that section. So what an opponent would have to say, and then how you would come back and refute that claim. And then your conclusion, where you're summing up your main ideas in new wording. Do not repeat your thesis word for word at the end of your paper. Do not do it ever, okay? Because it is boring to your reader. You want to sum up your ideas in a new, fresh way. You might also use what we call the bookend technique. So you start with maybe a quote or a story or an anecdote or something like that in the hook that you then come back and revisit in your conclusion. And so it sort of keeps your reader's interest. So here are some more tips. So the intro, you start with a hook, that opening line that makes your reader want to keep reading. You want to avoid trite phrases such as throughout history, from the beginning of time, from time immemorial. This is a 2-page paper, this first one. You can't write the entire history of the world in it, right? And then your first paragraph would continue by introducing your subject and finally by presenting your thesis. So you want to ask yourself, what does the reader need to know right away? So if you're analyzing a text or responding to it, you would state the title, the writer, your opinion as to the author's rhetorical message, and your thesis statement. It depends on what kind of paper you're writing as to how you're going to sort of approach that intro. And with a summary and response, it's different from these generalized instructions, because with a summary and response, you're starting with one line that gives us there's no hook. It gives us the author's last name, first name, full name. It gives us the title, and it gives us the author's main idea in that very first line. So it's different. Also remember the start broad and the narrow end. So here's an example of doing that. Most of us have experienced situations that seem challenging, but not everyone has lived through the violence, war, destruction, and devastation of a totalitarian regime. Moreover, few of those who have survived such tragedies are able to translate their grief into a vivid, poignant memoir that allows courage and truth to shine through its pages, pointing the reader towards the kind of bravery that uplifts us all. After a thorough read of an excerpt from Azar Nafisi's acclaimed book, Reading Lolita in Tehran, one may see that Nafisi creates an effective, moving account that transports readers into a different world, allowing them to step into the shoes of the other. So see how you started out broadly with your hook by saying, most all of us, so you're including your reader, most everybody has experienced a situation that seemed challenging, but not everyone has lived through violence and war and destruction and devastation because of this regime that takes over your country, right? So now you're starting to narrow. And moreover, there's a transition word. Few of those who have survived those tragedies are able to translate their grief into this memoir that allows such courage and truth to shine through its pages, right? And then you get into the actual thesis. After a thorough read of an excerpt of Nafisi's acclaimed book, one may see, not I argue that, or you will see, one may see that Nafisi creates an effective moving account. So your body paragraphs would establish your supporting points, the points that validate the main claim you made in your thesis. And if you looked at the above example as a case in point, you see that the body paragraphs need to somehow support the idea that Nafisi has written a piece that's vivid, realistic, effective, and moving. It's poignant, right? So we need evidence of that. What sentences in her story would show the use of vivid details? What sections would use language that feels realistic? Conversations maybe between her and others that she documents. What exactly makes her memoir effective? What portions appeal to us emotionally? So you would need to quote from or paraphrase those sections so your readers see the evidence for your claim in order to establish your own logos, sense of logic, and your own ethos, your sense of credibility to your reader. And then you would have your conclusion, a paragraph in which you sum up or restate your main ideas, your thesis, in different wording, and offer any final thoughts or insights. So here's the beginning template for a thesis for paper 1, because this is different than your typical college level paper. It's a summary and response. So again, in your very first line, you're going to give us the author's full name, the title of the piece, and the author's main message or thesis, right? You don't have a hook. You're not going to structure it the way you would generally do. And I'll be honest with you and tell you that I have an issue with making summary and response paper 1 in a 10-10 class for that very reason, because it's structured differently than all the other papers you'll ever do. And I think it can be confusing for students to hit them right off the bat with something that they're not going to do ever again. But that's just my humble opinion for whatever it's worth. But here's a beginning template for paper 1. Through a close summary and response of blank, so the title, whether you're choosing Durzik or Worthen, by blank, the author's full name, one may see that the use of blank, blank, and blank allows the writer to create an effective text. So it may be that you feel that Durzik or Worthen, maybe they've used a lot of logic and reasoning. Maybe they've used language that really feels emotional and gripping, whatever it may feel. So if we kind of plug that into the example with Azarna Thesis, which I teach in another 1010 section, through a close summary and response of an excerpt from Azarna Thesis reading Lolita in Tehran, one may see that the use of vivid details, realistic dialogue, and pathos, that's emotion, allows the writer to create an effective text. So that's how you would actually begin your summary and response, right? That would be your first line. You want to refer to that Mla template for paper 1 because it's really going to show you how to structure the summary and response. So remember, don't confuse the topic or the subject with a thesis. So for example, gun control is a topic, that's a subject. But to turn that into a thesis, you have to ask yourself, so what about gun control? So here's an example of a weak thesis. Gun control is a controversial topic in American society today. Well, again, duh, right? That's a fact. That's not a debatable claim. It only tells you what the topic is and tells you that it's controversial, but it offers no opinion, no statement, no claim about it that's debatable. Here's a strong thesis. After thoroughly researching the topic of gun control, one may argue that imposing rigid laws mandating citizens' rights concerning weapons contradict the foundational principles of the American Constitution. Now you've made a debatable claim about the topic of gun control with which others can come along and disagree or agree with, right? You've made a debatable claim. So again, bear in mind that this sheet is for your use, generally speaking, in college writing with developing a thesis. But for this first summary and response essay, there are very specific ways that you're going to do that will differ from these guidelines that are more generalized. And I apologize that that's confusing because I'm not a fan of that, but sadly, I don't have any control over that. So, all right, guys, thank you for your patience. I'll see you next time around.